So now we're going to take that modified pen grasp that we were just working on. So when I pick up the instrument, and I've switched over to my Explorer, you're going to be using your Explorer a lot. And the Explorer is no different than your instruments in that there's the shank, the working end, and the handle. So you have the same three parts. Your stroke is going to be lighter than the working stroke, so we'll use actual instruments when we get into the working stroke. But right now I want to take this modified pen grasp, so my thumb and my forefinger, or my index finger, are slightly apart. I'm going to take that middle finger and get it up onto the shank, and now we're going to take this and put it into a mouth. I'm going to use a typodont here. In the modified pen grasp, now we have to be able to take it into a working motion into the mouth. So as I take this in, your ring finger becomes your fulcrum finger. That's what's going to stabilize your instrument as you roll it, as you move it around. A common mistake for a fulcrum is a student will take it in and put it flat, making that instrument flat. You need to bring that fulcrum up. So the first thing that you're going to do when you're fulcruming, you're going to establish where you want that fulcrum. The most stable and safe place to establish a fulcrum is going to be on or next to the tooth that you're working in and within that same quadrant. So let's say that we're working down here on this lower right quadrant. When I go into a mouth and I'm going to work on number, let's say number 29, I'm going to come in, I'm going to put my fulcrum finger where I need it, and then I'm going to bring my other fingers to that. So this finger, my middle finger, is on the shank. My thumb and my index finger are slightly apart, and now I'm going to take these three and rest them against that fulcrum. And then I'm going to bring up that fulcrum. So if we ever tell you to get up on that fulcrum, get up. That's what we're asking you to do. As soon as you flatten that fulcrum or separate your fingers, you've lost that stability. Establish your fulcrum, bring your fingers to it, and get up onto that fulcrum. And you'll be in the position for the tooth. So that's regardless of where you're at in the mouth. If I'm working on my upper right, I'm going to establish my fulcrum, bring my fingers to it. So I'm always touching. These are stacked. This is what when we say to stack your fingers, that's what we're talking about. Everything moves as a unit. You don't want your fingers moving separately. It's your wrist that's going to do the action. So establish your fulcrum, and everything works as a unit. Okay? So that's going to be your fulcrum. So not flat, up on your fulcrum, next to or close to the tooth that you're working on, and you're establishing to establish that working stroke. Now, I'm going to switch over and I'm going to take a complex shank instrument. We're going to go back to that shank, and to help you establish the working end. So on an instrument such as a curette, it's a double-ended instrument. It's going to be a dual instrument where one face is just the opposite. So both ends are working ends. So to look at it and try to figure out which end you need, because remember on a curette there's only going to be one cutting edge. So it's area specific, one cutting edge. I need to take and look at that terminal shank. I want the terminal shank of that instrument to be parallel with the long axis of the tooth. So if I pick up an instrument and I place it on the interproximal, on the mesial, the interproximal, use either your premolars or a first molar or good teeth to use to check this. You're going to check and see that that terminal shank is parallel with the long axis of the tooth. if I were to pick up this end, I can fit that interproximal and I can fit it in here. And I can say I can get that parallel with the long axis of the tooth. What you have to remember is that there's going to be cheeks there, and to really get that parallel, my instrument is coming down, so it's going towards the back of the mouth. Besides being parallel to the long axis of the tooth, you always want to check to see that that handle is coming out of a patient's mouth. So I'm going to check there. So I can check and know that to get that handle to come out, my terminal shank is now not parallel with that long axis of the tooth. So I know that this is my working end.